The NHL is a pretty funny league. You know, sometimes you can make trades for money. That was a thing that you could do before, where players would get sent over for bags of cash because the way the economic system was structured back in those days, it wasn't really the same as akin to what we have now with the salary cap and all that, a flat cap and whatnot. So before, you could make trades of players and assets for money, because money was an asset. You also, today, which I didn't know beforehand, but you actually can do it now because we had like 3 trades done with this kind of fashion previously, you can make trades for nothing. Look at the Arizona Coyotes. They did this with Andrew Ladd. They took on Shane Gostisbehere, 2 separate trades where they acquired a player where you could say, okay, that player is of negative value because they're so expensive, yet they don't really provide anything in terms of on-ice play that is corresponding to their dollar amounts. And because they are getting this negative asset, hey, the other team that's sending over the asset needs to add on picks and whatnot to bring the value back to zero. So even though the Flyers gave up Shane Gostisbehere over to the Coyotes, they had to give up a whole bunch of other stuff in order for the Coyotes to say yes to that player. So you have some weird options for trades in the NHL, but the one that I wanted to talk about here today is not really any of those. Well, it's kind of a combination of both, if you want to say it like that, but not really. Let's talk today about how the Carolina Hurricanes pretty much just straight up bought one of the top prospects in the National Hockey League today from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Let's go back over to June of 2019, where the Carolina Hurricanes made themselves a trade acquiring a pretty significant name in the hockey world. This guy's name is Patrick Marleau, and yeah, you know who he is. He is the all-time leader of NHL games played, 41 years old, 6'2", 218. He doesn't have a contract at the moment, but he just wrapped up another season with the San Jose Sharks where he had 9 points in 56 games played. He has been kind of dropping off, but who cares? It's Patty Marleau, for crying out loud. There is no reason to go out there and doubt the man. Back in 2018-19, he was wrapping up his second season with the Toronto Maple Leafs, where he had 37 points in 82 games played. He also had 7 games played in the playoffs, and he had 2 assists. This was the series against Boston, where everybody was like, why in the world is Marleau playing so much like he is? Mike Babcock, man, what the heck? But eventually, because Patty Marleau was in a system with Toronto where the Leafs were a dynamic machine, they had players with contracts that needed to be signed, and they needed to work everything else around that. And it just so happened that Patty Marleau was a part of the cogs that needed to get moved. So, what happened in June of 2019 after the Leafs lost Game 7 to Boston? Hey, guess what? Patty Marleau gets traded over to the Carolina Hurricanes in a trade that sees Marleau, a 2021st and a 2027th, get sent over for a 2026th. Yeah, that's right. A 6th-round pick for a 1st, a 7th, and Patrick Marleau, who at the time was a pretty good 30, 35-point NHL guy. So, why exactly did the Leafs make this move? Well, if we go over to the cap-friendly page of Patrick Marleau and take a look at the contract that he had back then, you could see that he did have a pretty significant amount of money on the payroll. He had himself 1 more year at $6.25 million a season. Because, of course, the Maple Leafs signed him all the way back in 2017, and to be fair, in 2017-18, Patty Marleau had 47 points, he almost had 30 goals. He was great, especially in the postseason too. But once you get to a point where in 2018-19 you have what is pretty much the formative years of the current cap beast of the Toronto Maple Leafs today, it gets to a point where you have to start sacrificing some pieces, and for Marleau, he just happened to be one of those guys. 6.25 is not cheap after all. However, the Maple Leafs were in a position where you could kind of tell they needed every dollar they could get. They needed to trade Marleau with 0 salary retained. They couldn't buy him out because they would have a cap hit that would register for more than 1 more year, so they needed to get rid of him. And so, all of a sudden, there's leverage there. There's leverage for other teams to go out there and say, okay, Toronto, you really need to get this guy off your hands. Well, it's going to cost you a price. If you really want us to take your guy, then give us a 1st. That is exactly what the Carolina Hurricanes did, which is why they sent over Marleau, that 7th-round pick, and the conditional 1st, which was the meat on the bone, for what was a 6th round pick in return. And guess what? The Carolina Hurricanes, they bought out Marleau right away. Immediately after the trade was done, it was like 5 days later, they bought him out. And guess what? Marleau then signs a $700,000 contract with the San Jose Sharks, and he is back at home. Whatever happened to that first round pick, though? Let's talk about that. Well, there was a condition on the first round pick, as you can see here on the graphic. The Toronto Maple Leafs actually had 2 first round picks up for grabs in this sweepstakes. If Toronto's first round pick in 2020 was a top 10 pick, the Hurricanes would instead receive the 2021 first round pick from Toronto instead of the 2020 first, because they wanted to get some protection. If the Maple Leafs ended up winning like first overall or something, they didn't want to be like, okay, well, give it to Carolina because, hey, we gave them our first, right? And the Maple Leafs actually had a very legitimate chance at winning first overall because they were included in the lottery for Alexis Lafreniere because a play-in series loser ended up winning that year. Either way, though, Toronto didn't win it, New York did, and as a result, Toronto ended up dropping outside the top 10 to the 13th overall spot. Because that 13th pick was outside the top 10, it was sent over to Carolina, and the Hurricanes were ending off their entire trade saga for Marleau with a first-round pick at 13th overall. Let's talk about the guy they acquired, though, because this player, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated, underutilized, and just high-ceiling guys in the entire NHL Entry Draft of that year. His name is Seth Jarvis. He's 19 years old, 5'10", 174. He's a center right-wing player, and if you take a look at what he was able to do in his draft year, when he was acquired by the Hurricanes in the draft, 98 points, 58 games played for the Portland Winterhawks, 42 goals, 56 assists here. He became so much better as the year went on. It's almost like at the halfway point of the year, something just clicked within Seth Jarvis, where he unlocked a brand new gear of just slippery play that allowed him to maneuver his way in the offensive zone and just create offense on a dime. He was a fantastic sniper playmaker combo, and the scouting report here on Elite Prospects reads really well. His ability to work in tight spaces seems as good a place as any. Jarvis is one of the best attackers in the draft with a defender on his back. He seeks out pressure with gear changes or stops and starts, and then creatively pulls away with an arsenal of moves. As a gifted passer and shooter, he is the type of player who wants the puck on his stick. Now that was what he did last year in the draft-eligible season he had in 2019-20. What happened this year, though? Well, he didn't actually start out his year in the Portland Winterhawks with the WHL because they didn't actually kick off their year until a good chunk of the way through. Instead, with the new agreement in place between CHL and AHL players, Seth Jarvis suited up for the Chicago Wolves in the AHL. He was 18 years old, suiting up in the American Hockey League with pro men, and guess what he was able to do? 9 games played with the AHL Chicago Wolves, 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 total points. Seth Jarvis went out there and was over a point per game playing in the AHL as an 18-year-old. And guess what? There are only a few other players on this team who were able to go out there and actually get over a point per game kind of rates at scoring. You have Philip Tomasino, who is regarded as one of the best players from the 2019 draft, and then you also have Tommy Novak as well. Guess what, man? Seth Jarvis was in that boat, and he did some pretty good damage. He went back over to Portland, though, and he had 27 points in 24 games played, so he had a lot better of a point-per-game rating from 2019-20 than 2020-2021 in the WHL with the Winterhawks, but I'm kind of attributing it to just, the adjustment. He had to go back after playing pro hockey against men. We saw how good a lot of these young guys and recently drafted prospects were in the American Hockey League, and for Seth Jarvis, he was right there in that boat. Slippery, goal scoring, it all translated to the AHL with very little problems, and as a result, Seth Jarvis is one of the top NHL prospects in my opinion that isn't really getting as much love as he could be. Sure, he's 5'10", 174, he's not the biggest guy in the world. Sure, he's a Carolina Hurricanes prospect, and these guys rarely get, a whole bunch of attention unless their names are Andrei Svechnikov. But for Seth Jarvis, we know how good Carolina has been with their drafting. We know they love to take a look at analytics, and they take a look at guys who have really good on-ice metrics with goals for, goals against, Corsi percentages, and whatnot. He is really one of these guys that excels in this aspect, and I guess we're in this new kind of era where analytics kind of rule in certain departments. Carolina is definitely one of them. So we'll see in a few years how exactly that is able to translate to NHL success, because so far for Seth Jarvis, throughout his junior career, his minor junior career, the AHL as well, it has been phenomenal. So this has been the entire story so far, how the Carolina Hurricanes pretty much use their cap space to acquire Patty Marleau, to buy him out from the Leafs, and they got themselves a first-round pick because of it. They bought this top prospect from the Toronto Maple Leafs in the form of Patrick Marleau. Marleau was the vehicle that allowed them to execute that monetary transaction for this draft pick. So talk to me in the comments. What do you think about this entire story over here? Leafs, Jarvis, Hurricanes, Marleau, etc. I hope you enjoyed this video. Scholz 99. And bye.